I was born in London in St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington. And the day after I was born, there was the biggest race riot in London was in Notting Hill. Now, people know Notting Hill from the rom-com, but Notting Hill has a much darker history. And I think that situation prompted my parents to take their chance on America. This was the time of the Teddy Boys. It was a tough time in post-war England because, the cities that had been bombed had to be rebuilt. Many of the children of empire came, people from Pakistan, people from the Caribbean, people from Nigeria, from Africa, and there was a lot of resentment at that time. I was brought to America when I was about 1.5. And my first experience of media was seeing things with cartoons, and Bugs Bunny, and also Bull Connor, sicking his dogs on black people. I remember when Lee Harvey Oswald, I was a kid sitting between my parents who were both young people, and my father saying, "That's the man that shot the president." And I remember this hat coming into the frame. He was talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was shot on live television. I remember the Beatles appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show and nobody being able to hear a thing because of women screaming. My mother was a fan of the British invasion bands like the Dave Clark Five, but I was also raised with James Brown and the Motown sound. And I remember the first time hearing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds thinking, is that the same band that did I Want to Hold Your Hand? I remember hearing Sly and the Family Stone, Family Affair, which completely blew my mind. I remember the first time I saw Jimi Hendrix on the Dick Cavett show. And Dick Cavett saying to Jimi Hendrix, "They say you're the best guitar player in the world." And Jimmy, without a break, said, "I'm the best guitar player in this chair." I remember the opening music for The Twilight Zone. And The Twilight Zone it's the first time I ever experienced something that scared me to death that I couldn't wait to hear the next episode. Meeting amazing young people, my peers, meeting when I went to Brooklyn Tech High School, meeting, this funny, goofy piano player in the back of history class, Raymond Jones, who turned around and played on Good Times. He plays the Fender Rhodes part on Good Times. And seeing Chic with my friend from high school, these are the things. Hearing the multi-instrumentalist Arthur Rames, who died of AIDS in 1989, who played saxophone, piano, and guitar, still to me the best guitarist I've ever seen live. All of those things are part and parcel of what drew me towards music. All that to say, I was part of a kind of open call for musicians to audition for Mick Jagger. He's making Primitive Cool, his second solo record. And I dragged Corey Glover with me because I was scared to death. And it was so funny because there were all of these dudes, and they probably went and memorized all of the Stones songs, and Mick didn't want to sing any of them. He was doing Motown riffs and whatnot. So it was like people were prepared to do Jumping Jack Flash, and he wasn't having it at that time. We were playing at CBGB's, and during that audition, Mick says to me, "I hear your band is interesting. I'm going to come see you. I'm going to come see you." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And he showed up with him and Jeff Beck. Showed up to the show, and what was funny was Hilly Crystal's son ran up to me before the show, and I was outside of that terrible dressing room. I was outside of it, and he says, "You know who's here? Mick Jagger." And I immediately put it out of my mind, and I didn't tell the band. I didn't actually see Mick, but I was told he was there, and I immediately put it out of my mind, and I didn't tell the band because I knew if I started thinking about it, I would have went down a spiral. I would have changed. I would have been completely subconscious. If I told the band, it would have been, everybody would have been, So it was like we just played our regular show, and that was, I think, a moment. I pat myself on the back for for that because I knew it would have it would have went completely sideways. And he took us in the studio. I met Ed Stasium, who was his engineer, and we just hit it off. And Mick produced Glamour Boys and Which Way to America off of Vivid. He was really great in the studio. From the time we first played Cult of Personality at CBGB's, and that was written in one rehearsal, and from that moment and the crowd reaction to it, I was like, this song has got something. And we went with Middleman, which is also like the first song I co-wrote with Corey Glover, and I love it. But I was like, oh, okay. And then the song went out, didn't get a lot of ads, and so we basically at that time bands would get like maybe 2 bites, maybe 3 at the apple, and then you're done. If the third single doesn't happen, in some cases if the second single, but at that time you had 3 shots, and then your album cycle was done. So I remember our manager at the time, Jim Grant, walked up and said, "Okay, you're gonna get your wish," and he was like, "It's on you, bro." And I was like, I'm 100. I was like 100. I had full confidence. And the song started getting phones at WMMR in Philadelphia, and then WBCN in Boston. And it's interesting that we got added in Boston because they had this thing called the New Music Seminar. And at that time, I was part of this organization called the Black Rock Coalition. I started that with the writer Greg Tate, with the producer Craig Street, with the manager Conda Mason, and just a ragtag group of artists and musicians. And I had a big confrontation. They had a radio DJ summit, at the New Music Seminar. And we had made a flyer about how like these stations were, the Lee Abram things, they removed all African American stuff from rock radio. And we had a flyer about it. And somebody mentioned it to Oedipus, who was on the panel, and he lost it. He said, "I'm trying to do the best I can," and it was like a whole thing. And I was like, my career, we're done. Because I was in the room, and it was like, well, but what had been happening, this kind of segregation in radio. Because I remember a time when Frankie Crocker on WBLS, right, played "Miss You." Played the Stones, played Queen. I remember on WNEW would play Al Green, and play James Brown. And then suddenly all of that changed. And it was very clear. There was a feeling like these are my favorite stations, and I'll go back and forth. And then all of a sudden the stations had become completely separated. So anyway, eventually, Cult of Personality comes out, all of that, and WBCN was the second station to add it. NEW was like third or fourth. The song had taken off on radio, and that's when the video was approved. We did the video, and then it became a thing on MTV. I came from this unlikely place. I was in the R&B and funk thing. I got fired by his R&B songwriter Kashif, my friend Melvin Gibbs, who played bass with the Rollins Band. He said, "You got to hear this drummer I'm playing with." I went and saw Ronald Shannon Jackson. It was very avant-garde music. I've been exposed to Coltrane and Eric Dolphy and Ornette Coleman, and that had become part of my aesthetic. But those things didn't move rock and roll from my aesthetic. It was a very additive process for me. So all the things I dug, I still dug, and just other stuff came in. And hearing Frank Zappa, because Frank Zappa was avant-garde. You know what I mean? He was this weird combination, of rock and complete 12-tone music or what have you. So eventually, I started this band. I played with Shannon, and it was an incredible run with him. And then I started playing these little clubs. And then it was a trio, and I said, I'm an okay singer. I need a great singer. I remember a guy I met, at a birthday party. I called him up. All that to say, it was an unlikely bunch of steps that eventually led to Cult of Personality. It was weird. It was non-linear in the extreme. I have to acknowledge it's so different now. So for people to come into a business that's always shifting, it is going to be a non-linear pathway. You're going to have to walk your own road. You're going to have to turn left, turn right. It's going to be something counterintuitive, you know? The kind of collaborations, the people you meet, on the road, the people that are going to affect what you create. It's so important to be open to things. It's so important to be open to something that's maybe counterintuitive, that doesn't fit your narrative. The people you work with, you may work with, I don't know, I can't say. And there's no guarantees. Like the fact that I'm here talking, it's amazing. I don't take it for granted. I don't take it for granted at all. The idea of this as a creation being available for people, it's really coming from an impulse of, no one's going to tell you, there's no formula for this. You're going to have to love it, the music. You're going to have to throw yourself into it. And anything that you can pick up that's going to help you along. The intention behind this instrument is to be an aid to anybody's nonlinear journey. That's the whole point. Going into the studio with Carlos Santana, playing on Mariah Carey's first album, doing a session for Lady Gaga. She wasn't there. Producing, there was a Mexican rock band called Resorte, and I produced their first record, and of the things that I've done, I'm really proud of that. Mr. B.B. King, just being in his presence and co-producing, some music for him. I mean, playing on the first Public Enemy record. Like all of these things I felt very blessed to just be around people I find extraordinary. Some famous, some not so famous. But playing with Jack Bruce, I played on a number of Jack Bruce records, and then we had a project called Spectrum Road with Cindy Blackman Santana and John Medeski, playing the music of Tony Williams. I mean, these are magical things, to play the Hollywood Bowl and just look over at Jack and had this big smile on his face. And all these amazing, I saw Yus Srinamus, the great, the late great Indian mandolinist. He was phenomenal, play a Dawn Raga. Like all of these are just, I'm incredibly grateful. I'm incredibly grateful for the places I've been, playing with Jay Hogard in Egypt and seeing the pyramids of Gaza, going to seeing the Taj Mahal at different points of my career, before and after Living Color. All of these things, have just been, really, really special. Playing with Madeleine Peru, the great singer Madeleine Peru, and did a session, and then we left the studio, and I was standing there, and Biggie Smalls came out. Biggie Smalls, came out of this Mercedes, and I was standing there with one of the cats on the session. I'm like, oh wow, I think that's Biggie Smalls. And then Biggie walked up to us. I said, what? I said, we're fans. And then he kind of sucked his teeth and walked away. So all of the things, the chance meetings, and the session work, and it's been incredible. Underground Railroad of the Mind, my vinyl show. Yes, I have to do another. You remind me. I haven't done one of those. Yeah, I do that at Maker Park Radio in Staten Island, Shaolin. It's an all vinyl show where I play records for a couple of hours, and an Underground Railroad of the Mind. I kind of maybe think that should be a podcast on its own or something. Because You know, vinyl, there's so many records. I mean, we're inundated with music. But what's so interesting is that there's so many records, there are things that are not that were not digitized. And there's so many interesting, because records are fascinating. Like, there was a record I used on Mistaken Identity, my solo record, and was kind of Teach Your Parrot to Talk. It's a record that you're supposed to play for your parrot. You know, I didn't know that parrots were enough of a thing in America for there to be a record for you to teach your parrot to talk. It was, you know, completely, you know. And that's the thing about this, all of this arcana on vinyl, as well as, you know, incredible, you know, artists and, you know, bands that people have not heard of. I mean, the music business was a different business post the 60s, in the 70s. I mean, bands would go on tour and they would do press conferences and reporters would show. It was a whole different thing. And in that era, I mean, there were so many of these records that were made and they've been overlooked or forgotten. So, you know, doing Underground Railroad of Mine has been, you know, I've been kind of busy, but I love it. I want to do another episode of it. Keep it moving. My advice would be follow your instincts and never stop creating. Don't censor yourself. And I mean that, and I mean that in the sense when people hear that, they think in terms of language or use. No. Because language is the surface thing. There are things that we have inside of us, our fears, our hopes, that we don't dare to approach. And you have to dare to approach. That's what I mean. Not talking about bad language, this and that, but like, if you really want to talk about your parents' divorce, you got to do it. And the other thing is, our stories are our own. Our stories are our own. In fact, thinking about young people, there's a young guitarist who I've been following. I've been associated with, named Malcolm Brickhouse. You know, he was part of this band Unlocking the Truth, and you could find some of the things he's doing on YouTube. He's kind of doing a really interesting thing where he's combining trap music with metal and hip hop, but in a way that's really unusual. Another person who I've known from a very young age is Marcus Machado. You know, who's wonderful guitarist. He's part of this band 13 with Pharoah Monch. You know, I take, you know, that, you know, there's, I think, A Wonderful Day for an Exorcism, if I'm not butchering that title. Check that record out. Their lives are vastly different. The social media thing, TikTok and Instagram, like a lot of older people say, man, you're always on your phone, and complaining about that. I get that. But what we don't get is these children, that's the only thing, they've grown up with it. That's the part of it that I think older people don't take into account. This has always been there. Imagine Instagram has always been there, or TikTok always be. Their relationship is fundamentally different. So, you know, I mean, it's important to deal with the physical world. And we're creating these entities and these things, and we don't know where it's going. So it's a profoundly unsettling time. But what's still true is, you know, what we have to say, what an individual has to say, and what they've lived.